And we are live and good to go.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'm Senator Julie Kushner. I think I know many of you, but also we have with us Representative Manny Sanchez. We'll be co-chairing this uh, task force. So I don't know, Manny, if you want to say a few opening words.
Thank you, everybody that's participating on this task force. We obviously went through a long, rigorous process to get a 6 days done for our entire state, and this is clearly a commitment to an effort that Julie and I think that should be handled in the ways that we will discuss tonight. And I look forward to discussion.
Thank you, Manny. And I think because Manny is phoning in, it would probably be helpful if I chair this first meeting of the task force. So I would start by just asking each of you, first of all, thank you all for agreeing to serve on this task force. And I think it would be great if we could start with introductions. And so why don't I just go around who I could see on the Zoom here. So let's start with you, Joe.
Sure.
Introduce yourself, a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, Joe Ercolano with the Connecticut Small Business Development Center. That's my day job. Resident of Bridgeport. I've been with the Small Business Development Center for 11 years, and we serve small businesses of every shape, size, and type throughout the state. So we're really happy to be. I'm happy to be able to maybe add some comments and some thoughts to this committee.
That's great. Well, welcome. Next, I see Michelle. Oh, you're muted.
Mute. Okay, can you hear me? My name is Michelle Nicholson, and I am excited to be a part of this task force. I have not ever served on anything like this before, but I'm a small business owner in Hebron, Connecticut. So I have one of the small businesses that is kind of directly impacted. I own a bakery and a cafe, so I have maybe a slightly different perspective. I have, a lot of employees who are under the age of 18. Like I have some perspective here from a slightly different different viewpoint. So I'm hoping to be able to add a little bit to this, is just making sure that we're keeping some of the folks in the hospitality industry in mind. It's a tough industry to be in. So stuff like this does impact us quite a bit.
Well, thank you for participating. We'll be anxious to hear from you. And the next person I see, I think the last person on our task force is someone I know well, Fran Pastore.
Hi, Senator Kushner. Hi, Joe. How are you? Hi, Michelle. And I'm Fran Pastore. I run the Women's Business Development Council in Connecticut, and do work very similar to Joe. Our clients typically have less than 5 employees. So I am excited to add value to this committee where I can, and I'm honored to serve. So thank you.
Great. So I'm sure you're all very much aware of the paid sick days bill that passed the legislature last year. I think many of our small businesses already do provide paid sick time, not all, but we know that this is something that is really important to the working families of our state. I think in particular, and I know Fran so well because Fran serves as the chair of the Paid Family Medical Leave Program here in Connecticut that has been so successful. But it also, I think, in administering that and being part of the legislators that work hard to support that fund, we became very aware of this sort of donut hole that workers face when they're sick, but they're not seriously ill. And so, so many of them, particularly during COVID, when people were forced to stay home because they had COVID, but they weren't sick enough to go to the hospital or even necessarily go to the doctor. If you were fully vaccinated, often COVID meant, you felt lethargic, you might have a fever. but you needed to stay home. And even some instances where people were exposed to cases of positive COVID and, were, especially at the beginning, were required to stay home and isolate for a period of time. Those folks were not covered by the Paid Family Medical Leave Act. And in instances where people didn't have access to paid time off, we often found people would go to work. And if your child is sick and you don't have any paid time off and you send them to, a childcare program or to school, we then see the effects of that, that cold or infection or flu spreads like wildfire through these institutions, and it creates a public health hazard. And so for us, we were really seeking to address this and ensure that over the next 3 years, every employee employed in private sector will have access to at least 40 hours of paid sick time. For the smallest businesses, the reason that we constituted and made as part of the statute the establishment of this working group is because we know for the smallest employers, we did phase it in so that, with employers with 5 people or less employed, it won't go into effect until 2027. So that gives us an opportunity to hear from you and, sort of the problems you envision and if there's things that the state could do to help with that. So that is, that is our reason for being. And, I want to thank my co-chair, Manny Sanchez, and the House and Senate leadership for not only supporting us to get this bill passed and to make it into law, and the governor certainly as well, but also for recognizing the need for this working group and this task force. So that's the introduction, and I would be happy to hear from you about what next steps you think we ought to take to maybe if there are things you want to say today, we want to hear from you. But in addition, if there are things that you think we should put on our agenda to discuss going forward, we're happy to have a more, robust discussion as we go along. So I will open the floor for discussion.
Senator, maybe I'm alone in this, but I'm wondering, I understand what we're charged with, but how do we get there? How do we come up with this? What exactly is the pathway to make sure that we are protecting the most vulnerable businesses and making sure that we're protecting the most vulnerable people in those that work for those very tiny, tiny businesses with regard to the tax credits?
I think, I think first and foremost, we need to hear from businesses, small businesses, what is the financial impact on them? It's 40 hours a week. I know, Michelle, you mentioned, in the hospitality industry, you have a lot of part-time workers. We do have, it's an accrual-based system. So not everyone will accrue enough hours. We also have an exclusion for seasonal workers. So you have to work at least 120 years in a year in order to qualify for the benefit. So there are things that we already built into it. And I think what we're anxious to know is that enough? Or are there going to be things that will hit you financially that we should be aware of? Getting tax credits for anything, as you know, the budget is very tight in terms of having enough revenue and having enough resources to provide all the services we need to provide as a state. But that is the primary charge, is to think about whether or not something could be done in that regard to help people. And it may mean that we need to bring in some folks from the finance committee or from if there are things that are done, maybe researchers who know that there's other states that do something along these lines, if not for paid sick days, maybe for another small business, tax incentive. So I think we're open to hearing everything.
So I think from my perspective, one of the things that I don't know if I understand is if this, does this task force have the ability to clarify the regulations, or are we just tasked with the tax credit piece of it?
My response to that is that the key charge is to look at the tax credit, but I think this is always a good forum to discuss anything that you have with regard to concerns. I do think that because these are not regulations, they're, it's statute. So any at the task force would recommend would always go to the legislature.
So I think that, I definitely support the tax credit thing. And, I think all of that is very helpful, but I can tell you that from the perspective of my industry and my business size, which is going to be right on the cusp of the 50 employees, not full-time employees, but employees, is going to be two things. And I'm sure that my industry, the healthcare industry is probably similar. But when you have a small business that has to have people in the door in order to operate, having somebody call out sick puts a financial strain on the business. So having, if oftentimes when you're a small operation like I am, if somebody calls out sick, especially for more than one day, that means pushing people into overtime. So not only are you paying out the paid sick leave, so you're paying this person to come in even though they're not there, you're often paying another employee time and a half in order to cover the sick employee. So there is a large financial strain, I think, on small businesses that need people to operate. It's not like it's not like we can just wait until next week to work on this project. Like, this is like to open the door, we have to have people in the building, right? And then the other thing that I felt like was missing, and I don't know how we could address this with tax credits. I had mentioned that I have a lot of employees that are under the age of 18, and that is very much the case in the service industry, where you have employees who are maybe like 17 years old. And though I completely agree that, my chef who's a working mom, I give her paid time off, of course, so that she can help with her family and stuff. But the 17-year-old kid who's living at home with little to no expenses may not need that paid time off the same way. But I don't know how, as a task force, that's something that we could try to address. I can just tell you that it's a concern of mine. When you do have a staff that has so many people under the age of 18, we're teaching these kids already how to work. 9 times out of 10, dishwashers, that's the first job you have. So we teach them already how to work and how to call out correctly and not, try to find coverage for themselves and all those things. And now, in addition to that, we do have to offer them paid time off on top of that. And they do meet the minimum requirements. Like, they're not seasonal employees, they're just part-time employees. But I don't know how that could translate to the tax credit piece. I think it's just a piece that maybe we might want to keep in mind.
I think this comes up a lot in our committee from employers like yours who employ young workers. Certainly came up in the conversation about minimum wage. The challenge is twofold. One, we're teaching them about being in the workforce, as you said, and it's really hard when there's a different standard for the young worker than there is for someone who's a little bit older. And I think the other challenge that's really important to recognize, in some communities, young people work because they want some extra money, or they are saving for college. But there are many, many young people that are working to help support their families. And so it's hard to create a law that doesn't recognize that, or somehow evaluates your personal circumstances and says, okay, you need the money, but you don't. So obviously we can't legislate in that way, but we recognize that it is a challenge for employers like yours. And I don't know if there's a way to translate that into a tax credit.
I don't know if there is either. I just know that, like, from my perspective, like that, when you're asking, like, how does this impact the bottom line of small businesses? That's the spot for it. You know what I mean? Is like I can have a dishwasher call off work on prom night, citing a mental health day, and I have to pay them for it. And it's, you know what I mean? I think that I don't know how that can translate in a way to try to ease that burden for small businesses.
So
I don't know if there's like incentives of what I'm afraid of having happen is businesses like mine will stop hiring kids. Which would be unfortunate because this is the way most kids find their way in to the workforce is through the restaurant industry or grocery stores, but those are the big ones.
Mhm.
And I don't want to see that happen because I think it is really important. And I honestly think the service industry in general, like it's important for a lot of people to walk a day in those shoes. So starting in a dishwashing position, I would just hate to see it where restaurants are no longer able to try to take that kind of staff in because we can't afford to do it.
Yeah. And I would have to, I mean, I think that that particular issue that you call, that someone calls out and they're not really sick, it's hard when you say it's a mental health day. Someone could argue that going to the prom is a mental health
Absolutely.
for them.
Or a rite of passage.
But I mean, I know as, you know, from having represented workers that it's really a little bit dangerous for workers to abuse benefit because it can be grounds for termination. And so they're setting themselves up too. So, you know, I don't know if in that
prom
situation
is probably a fairly bad example. Like, of course,
it'll be all over
my
Facebook.
dishwasher's prom off. Like, of course we do. But just, you know, it's kind of an extreme example of how this can have an impact. You know, if I have 5 dishwashers scheduled on prom night and they all call off, I'm paying crazy overtime to cover. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, but I just don't know how we can. I don't know how we can impact that.
Yeah. I mean, some of these problems, though, I do want to remind you that some of these problems would, you wouldn't necessarily have to pay someone the time off. And that's the issue because, and I'm sure you would give them the time off just because it's prom night. You live in a small community, everybody knows, you know, and I'm sure you're a very good boss. So I think we have to like also see, you know, one of the things that I hope this group will continue to meet beyond the beginning of session, because I think it's going to take us longer to really examine these issues. So I would recommend that hopefully, you know, we never get started when we think we're going to get started. We legislate that we're going to have a working group and then we don't get started before the next session and we find we're supposed to be issuing a report. But I would say that I would recommend that we consider and maybe talk at the next meeting about extending the time that we're meeting so that we can have a little more robust conversation about these things because you know, I think it's really important that we support working families, but we know we also we are very cognizant of the impact on businesses. And I also think that we also have to see how this works. Now, in your case, as a small business, it won't go into effect right away, but there are many businesses that it is going to impact immediately starting January 1. And so we'll have an opportunity over, you know, the next year to really evaluate what are how's it working? And is it working for everyone?
Well, and the point of the tax credits are supposed to be, I assume, to benefit the people who are playing by the rules, right? Like, so we probably need to identify how to categorize that so that people can benefit from doing what they're supposed to be doing as opposed to, I mean, I'm sure there's going to be businesses who are not playing by the rules right away. And, you know, you kind of want to incentivize the people who are jumping on board, right? So like trying to alleviate some of their costs but at the same time rewarding them with that incentive for, I mean, the legislation is the legislation, so we want them to play by the rules. We don't want them to ignore them.
Exactly. Anyone else?
I think what might be helpful, let me speak for myself. It would be helpful for me to hear how these tax credits will ultimately benefit firms and which firms get more benefit maybe than others, because the tax process is not something I deal with every day. So somebody might say something to me 3 months ago, but I've forgotten it already. It doesn't even take 3 months to forget sometimes. But just like a review of how these tax
Exactly.
credits would actually apply and how people would take advantage of them, companies would take
Joe,
advantage.
thank you. Thank you, Joe, for asking that question.
Yeah, so maybe it's somebody from DRS doing a quick run through, or maybe
Mhm.
there's legislative staff that are really familiar with it. Just a
And
suggestion.
is this a given already? Are the tax credits no? So
They're not a given. Okay.
they're not a given. Yeah, that I was not clear on that either. So we are formed as a committee to explore how to offset the burden. I mean, I'm please correct me if I'm wrong. It seems from what I'm hearing, as a committee, we have been formed and appointed to serve to determine how to alleviate some of the pressure on these small businesses with less than 5 people through tax credits.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay.
It is not a given. And
I got it.
that's why I think it's important for us to figure out, we need to involve our, and Cameron, you can help us with this. I think we need to involve our Office of Legislative Research to see if there are other states that are doing something similar
Right.
to this, even if it's not for paid sick days, but for some other tax subsidy that small businesses are eligible for. Because I think, I'm not certain that there is anything like this that's already out there, but if there is, it could serve as a model for us.
Okay, so that really helps a lot. And also I'm in agreement with Joe, to get us somebody that is a professional that deals with this type of thing, like from Joe said from DRS, that would be great. I wanted to add something I know we have to break in a minute, but I wanted to add something to what Michelle said. Just by happenstance, we happened to do a quick and dirty look at our clients to look at how many of them were in the quote unquote hospitality industry. And for us, hospitality, the word tourism came up, right? Because you think about it, how sweet it is to go to a nice little town like Hebron and go to a lovely cafe and have a little bite to eat. And, people come to Connecticut looking for that, right? And so what was astounding to me is that just at first blush, it was like nearly 40% of our clients fall into this hospitality tourism business. Basically, anything that you can buy to enhance your experience coming into the state. That's not Walmart. It's not Costco. It is quaint and charming. And so the reason I was doing that was I had a request from the Connecticut Council on Tourism to get an idea, to get a handle on that. And as I'm listening to Michelle speak, and I'm thinking about our clients, I'm thinking about the magnitude of these sick days, the negative impact that it could really have on them. Because you are operating on a shoestring, typically, and your margins are pretty low. And it's really hard to get any kind of skilled labor. So you're forced, I'm guessing, Michelle, from my own experience and then listening to you, you're kind of forced to hire the kinds of the kids and the people that you're hiring, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So I think those are the kinds of things, like, Senator, that we need to really take into consideration, because if we think of it as an industry, if we think of a lot of these small businesses, not all of them, but a lot of them fall into this category. I think it's something that it's critical mass and we need to think about. I don't know, Joe, what do you think? I mean, I'm guessing, I saw you nodding your head, so I'm guessing you
Yeah,
get
no,
what I'm
you know, again, I'm also just constantly thinking about how people pay taxes on their
Yeah,
revenue. And
yeah,
clearly retail or a hospitality establishment is paying sales tax. The sales tax has been extended to so many other businesses, but there may be a broader impact for certain categories of industries
yeah, yeah,
than others, and we might want to just take that into consideration. Maybe
yeah,
not. Maybe it's not that much different, but you're right. I mean, there's other ramifications of what industries are important to achieve state economic development objectives, which we all know. We can name the industry clusters that
Mhm.
we'll talk about all the time, but we're not talking about that here. We're talking about, well, maybe we are, because there's startups and small companies in every industry, obviously, but there's also other important roles for small business and communities
Yes,
that aren't necessarily related to the ability to grow to 500 jobs, because that's very rare these days anywhere in the
right.
U.S., let alone in Connecticut. So I think that's a good point. Let's take a look at what are other objectives of the state we're trying to accomplish, and how does this dovetail with what we're looking at here for relief. I think it's a good point.
So I know we are, oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna ask, I don't know the answer to this question, but it's probably very clear as I'm beginning to articulate it. Single member LLCs and sole props, this does not apply to them, just like paid leave, right? I mean, how could it? They're gonna pay sick days to themselves? I just want to be
Yeah.
clear because I find it
So
somewhat complicated.
the language of the bill is clear. It doesn't refer to single, it just refers to self-employed.
Got it, okay.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
single member LLCs, this still applies to single member LLCs.
It does, because
Yeah.
single
Yeah.
member LLCs that employ people,
Correct. Like I am a single member LLC.
it would apply to you. That's why
Exactly.
it's the word self-employed, because people who are self-employed wouldn't pay themselves.
Right. So like
Right.
I'm not required to give myself paid sick leave, but I am
Right.
required to give it to my employees.
Correct.
Right, but a single member LLC of which the single member is the only employee, of course, you're not required to, okay.
Yes.
I do appreciate this very first opportunity to meet. I know we will schedule another meeting. I think that we should do it through camera, and since it's a small group, we can try and accommodate everybody's schedules. In bigger task force, we usually have a set day and time. We don't need to do that here because it is a small group. I think we can figure out the dates that work best for folks. And so Cameron will reach out to you about scheduling the next meeting. And I don't know, Manny, if you want to make any closing remarks.
No, I just want to say thank you all, and I look forward to continuing this work.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. And
Thanks.
we will get together soon, probably after the New Year. So have a happy New Year's and happy holiday, whatever you
Thanks,
celebrate.
everyone. You
All
too.
right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.